Peace, and welcome to another episode of the Quranic Remedies, where we spend about 15 minutes exploring a page from the Quran together and seeing how we can apply the verses to our lives. And hopefully, with God's permission, it helps us heal our brain, body, mind, and soul. So today we'll be reading from chapter 3, the Family of Imran, from verses 166 to 173. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge to God from the accursed devil. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the gracious, the merciful. وما أصابكم يوم التقى الجمعان فبإذن الله وليعلم المؤمنين. What befell you on the day the two armies clashed was with God's permission, that He may know the believers. وليعلم الذين نافقوا وقيل لهم تعالوا قاتلوا في سبيل الله أو ادفعوا قالوا لو نعلم قتالا لاتبعناكم هم للكفر يومئذ أقرب منهم للإيمان يقولون بأفواههم ما ليس في قلوبهم والله أعلم بما يكتمون. And that he may know the hypocrites. And it was said to them, come fight in the cause of God or contribute. They said, if we knew how to fight, we would have followed you. On that day they were closer to infidelity than they were to faith. They say with their mouth what is not in their hearts, but God knows what they hide. الذين قالوا لإخوانهم وقعدوا لو أطاعونا ما قتلوا قل فادرءوا عن أنفسكم الموت إن كنتم صادقين. Those who said of their brethren, as they stayed behind, had they obeyed us, they would not have been killed. Say then, avert death from yourselves if you are truthful. ولا تحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء عند ربهم يرزقون. Do not consider those killed in the cause of God as dead. In fact, they are alive at their Lord, well provided for. فرحين بما آتاهم الله من فضله ويستبشرون بالذين لم يلحقوا بهم من خلفهم ألا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. Delighting in what God has given them out of His grace, and happy for those who have not yet joined them, that they have nothing to fear, nor will they grieve. يستبشرون بنعمة من الله وفضل وإن الله لا يضيع أجر المؤمنين. They rejoice in grace from God and a bounty, and that God will not waste the reward of the faithful. الذين استجابوا لله والرسول من بعد ما أصابهم القرح للذين أحسنوا منهم واتقوا أجر عظيم. Those who responded to God and the Messenger despite the persecution they had suffered, for the virtuous and the pious among them is a great reward. الذين قال لهم الناس إن الناس قد جمعوا لكم فاخشوهم فزادهم إيمانا وقالوا حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل. Those to whom the people have said, the people have mobilized against you, so fear them. But this only increased them in faith, and they said, God is enough for us. He is the excellent protector. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. God the Great said the truth. Now, here we have another example on how God is showing the believers from the disbelievers. So there was a portion, or within the battle, that there was a contention where the believers were rendered in some form of defeat. But they were not completely defeated, but they had to suffer a loss. And within that loss, they lost a few people, as the verses are showing. But this is when God is testing to see who's the actual true believer and who's giving lip service. So the people who did not waver and they stood their grounds despite these calamities that occurred or these setbacks, they are truly the ones who are showing and expressing to themselves that they truly believe in God's promises and God's verses. God already knew who is honest and who's the hypocrite, but he is distinguishing them. For one, they themselves can witness upon themselves, and two, for the people to learn who these individuals are, is just so that you would learn from their characteristics and the way that they've approached life. As you see here, that God is saying that He was also showing that who the true hypocrites are. So the hypocrites are the ones that were, when they were told to, hey, it's time to fight, they were the ones who were trying to set back and stand back and saying like, hey, if we knew how to fight, we would come with you. And they're giving 1,000,001 excuses on why not to go. And you could see that these individuals thought that they were the ones who are escaping these hardships and that they were the smart ones, because they're telling their brothers who did pass away, they were saying, oh, well, if they were listening to us and they followed us, they wouldn't have been dead now. Because they assume that these decisions that they make, they can actually, those decisions that they take, they avail them from God. But it's quite the opposite. It's just because God is already encompassing everything that an individual does and encompassing everything that a community goes through. So these are all matters that go back to God, and God is the one who's deciding. And because we are believers, we have to see the positive reasons on why God has decided what he decided. Yes, sometimes we've done things that we shouldn't have done, and it's a form of almost a punishment from God. But it's also a sign for us to fix ourselves, because as God states that he will allow us to taste some of the punishment here on earth, lest we return. This would apply to the believers and disbelievers if the believers are not doing what they're supposed to do. But there is something that's extremely interesting here. God is saying that on that day they were closer to disbelief than they were to faith. So the Quran here is always expressing itself in a very polar way, in a very binary way. Disbeliever, believer. Honest, dishonest. A believer, a hypocrite. So these labels, it seems like they're so black and white, and they are in fact black and white. But God here is showing us that there is a scale in between these two polar opposites that God usually paints in the Quran. So here he's saying that they were closer to disbelief than they were to believe. Okay, so on this scale, they have now tipped over into disbelief rather than faith. Yet it does not mean that they're 100% disbelievers. They are people who are obviously labeled as hypocrites, not in a sense that they don't believe in God, but they believe in God, yet they don't want to do what God has ordered them to do. This is a form of hypocrisy that is mentioned here. And notice that this scale here, it's important for us to always keep in mind. We're not going to meet somebody that's 100% a believer, and we're not going to meet somebody that's 100% a disbeliever. These are the polar opposites that where God is going to judge us. And if you are closer to a believer, then you would be labeled as a believer. And if you're closer to as a disbeliever or a hypocrite, then that's the label that is fitting for you. These judgments, unfortunately, it's very difficult for us as a regular believer to actually impose on people or to find the right judgment, because these judgments have to come from God at the end of the day. Yes, we do use the book of God to pass off some judgments on certain situations that have occurred. But as God shows us in chapter 7, that sometimes there's some people that people would assume that they are not good people, that they would be disbelievers. Yet on the day of judgment, it shows that these individuals, they were just put through a task or through a system where they had to perform something from God, and they actually fulfilled their tasks. So for everyone else, they look like bad people, but in the eyes of God, they were actually pious and righteous people. So they would enter the paradise. We were going to get that into chapter 7 and some other verses. But notice how the hypocrites, they have a common theme that we usually find in the Quran. They give you lip service. So they just say things that is not being evident in the way that they actually choose by their decisions or by what they do. So as people say, actions speak louder than words. Here, unfortunately, the words are burying them, because they keep trying to say things to make you satisfied with them. So they say things in their mouth, but their hearts is actually on a different plane. And then when it comes down to their decision making, they just make the wrong decision constantly, because as God states that they are hypocrites. So when it came down to fighting in the name of God, in the cause of God, they thought that the right decision was not to fight, yet they would probably swear to you up and down that they're such pious and good believers. But in the moment where push came to shove, their true colors showed. Now, the thing that people don't realize, that dying in the cause of God is a great reward, because you taste death, but you're not dead. You are still capable of actually getting provisions from God in that moment of you being not alive, not present. Sorry, you are alive, but not present in this worldly life. We are not able to interact with them, and they're not able to interact with us. But there is something that's interesting that God does state in these verses, that these individuals are also glad and rejoicing for what they got, and they're looking forward to their brothers that have yet to join them, for them to experience what these individuals, these martyrs, are experiencing in this current sense. So the reward is so great that one of the things that you do is you think about the others that are about to get this reward with you. This is obviously something that's extremely amazing. Now, one thing that we have to keep in mind, and the reason why this is such a great reward, you tasting death but not dying. That means when it comes down to the day of judgment, you were alive from the time that you were born all the way till the day of judgment, yet you tasted death. So the amount of rewards that you were getting throughout this in this time period where you are in a state of not being in the present world, but yet you are alive somewhere else, it is such a great blessing and is such a great reward. Now, a few episodes before, the last episode, we were talking about how if God gave you, for example, 80 years and you've sacrificed 30 years in the name of God because you died on the battlefield. So you by yourself cut that 30 years away. You technically just traded those 30 years on the worldly life for many, 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 many years until the day of judgment pertaining. Let's assume that the day of judgment is in many, many years. This concept here is something that's extremely amazing. So let's assume these individuals that we're reading about when the prophet was alive about 1400 years and martyrs have been taken and the true believers have been shown in those moments. They've traded 20 years for another 1400 years of them getting more benefits in their books on the day of judgment. Because as God states that he is delighting them and he's giving them from his blessings. And these blessings are always used, if someone is pious, to build for their hereafter rather than to building here. So you trading those 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years that you have left on this earth for literally for you to keep surviving until the day of judgment, not on earth, but in God's book, it's a trade that anyone with any kind of sense of responsibility and any sense of piousness would do instantly. That's why it's such a great reward for you to truly fight in the name of God and die in the name of God. But the interesting fact is that even if you won, you're still getting a huge reward because you were a person who witnessed the victory of God. And because of your victory, you're going to affect the future in such a great way that it's going to always be worth it. Now, as God states that he does not waste the rewards of the faithful. As you can see now with the picture that we've painted to you today, and it's such a healing understanding. It's such a healing feeling of healing where you realize that even in your death, you could be a winner. You don't die and you are alive. You go through what God has promised you to, which is tasting death, and you're trading your extra years for you to become one of them, to become in a position where you have so much on the day of judgment. But the reason why you did it is just for God to be happy with you. Now we go to these individuals as well, that these are distinguished between the believers. Okay, so unfortunately, when bad things occur, people flutter, but they still stick through. They still hold on to the rope, but they might not be happy in that moment. They might start to voice some complaints. They might show some hate, but they still carry on because they know that that's the right thing to do. But God is here distinguishing some individuals that when they saw that there's going to be problems and they've went through the calamities, they were still being virtuous and pious, and they're keeping their proper psyche and the proper way of viewing things and staying positive, where God is telling you that these individuals have a great reward because they've still answered to God and his messenger, and they understood that these battles sometimes you're going to lose, but it's not a reason for you to lose your faith or to lose that wind that God has given you or the spirit that God has given you. And these are the individuals when, unfortunately, we see in this day and age where, the individuals do the right thing, but many others is that when they realize that there's an opposing force, they usually fold their hands very quickly. But there's others when people say like, hey, you know what? People are coming after you and there's going to be a group of people coming against you. At that point, they double down on their faith. It's like, no, you know what? What I'm doing is right. I'm going to try to deal with this as best as I can. And God is with me, and that's enough for me. And throughout the events of them being attacked and going through everything that they need to go through, they keep seeing these signs from God where it just increases their faith. So the moment you know that people are mobilizing against you because of your faith, you know for a fact that you have changed enough in the world where people are upset. People are upset that you're in a position where you are making a difference to something that's better, because obviously you're following the verses of God in that moment. And because they mobilized against you, it's only because they hate you. If it was something that was not of piety or something that is not good, the way that they're going to mobilize against you is the same way that you would attack them, because it becomes ideology against ideology, and it's the bigger ego wins. Unfortunately, a lot of the wars in this day and age, it's a devil against a bigger devil, and whoever is a bigger devil, then based upon the circumstances and by the choice of God, whoever wins, wins. But when it comes down to believers, it's not about your size, but rather about the ideology of what you're trying to spread. And because it's not about you trying to fight and subvert and try and take over people's nations, you automatically start to change a lot of people's hearts, because they tend to hear the truth and they recognize the truth and they recognize the signs of God, and it's up to them to believe or disbelieve. But when you start to have some few people starting to believe, these individuals start to cause a ripple in society, and the people who are running the current society start to get unhappy. They start to get bothered that people are figuring out the truth on how to truly be free, which is by following the sacred book of God and the messenger of God. And when these events usually occur, yes, people are going to mobilize against you. And this does not necessitate for it to be on the battlefield. People will always mobilize against you if you are doing the right thing. And you just have to remember in those moments that this is what God told you is going to happen. So you should strengthen your faith. You should be more solidified in what you're believing, and you should be more content and more certain that you are on the right path. And now those moments you have to ask for forgiveness constantly, because you do not want to be the person who's transgressing or doing the thing that is not going to be helpful. Because unfortunately, in the battlefield, whether intellectual or physical or spiritual, there are always times where, because you keep getting hit, you sometimes may take a shot that you shouldn't have taken. And this is where the tolerance and the forbearing and the mercy of God is extremely important, because if it wasn't for his forgiveness and his mercy, we would all be losers. But this is what's amazing about your Lord, is he knows those who are truly striving in his name, and he knows those that are just full of lip service. God is distinguishing them for us so that we know who to rely on in the times when you need to rely on somebody who's definitely always going to be God. But when we're relying on God, we're also relying on the trust that God has given us between the believers, and knowing who to trust in the affairs of the believers, something that's incredibly important. Because you always have to find a leader that you're going to follow. And sometimes you, as a leader, you need to see those that are going to support you and support the word of God, rather than to sit and try to establish a cult, for example. With that said, I truly hope you guys are enjoying these. All praise to the Lord, Lord of the worlds, and peace be upon you.